All right, let's jump right into this explainer and begin our investigation into one of the most elusive and dangerous emerging infectious diseases on the planet. We're talking about the Nipah virus, or NIV. Now, this is a true medical detective story. Nipah is what epidemiologists call a priority pathogen. In fact, the World Health Organization has placed it squarely on their list of priority diseases, and for very good reason. It has an exceptionally high death rate, an absolute lack of targeted treatment, and it mounts a devastating attack on both the brain and the lungs, causing incredibly severe illness. Our goal today is to unravel the intricate mystery of how this virus operates, trace exactly where it comes from, and figure out what we can actively do to stop it in its tracks.
So, we're faced with this ultimate biological mystery. How does a quiet forest dweller become a severe human threat? The natural carriers of this virus are fruit bats, which are widely known as flying foxes. For millennia, these fascinating creatures have just fluttered through the sprawling forest canopies of Asia, Australia, and the South Pacific, really just minding their own business. They're an absolutely essential part of their local ecosystems. But under the right, or, perhaps I should say the incredibly wrong circumstances, the virus they silently carry manages to bridge the vast genetic gap between their species and ours. And understanding that exact jump is the absolute key to preventing a widespread global crisis.
And the stakes here are just staggering. We're looking at a case fatality rate ranging from 40% all the way up to 75%. Just let that number sink in for a second. This makes tracking this pathogen an absolute global priority. When a virus is this exceptionally deadly, every single localized outbreak becomes an immediate race against time for health organizations around the world. We aren't dealing with some mild seasonal bug that keeps you in bed for a few days. We're dealing with a severe disease that claims the lives of up to 3/4 of the people it manages to infect, depending entirely on local clinical care.
To understand the trajectory of this threat, we really have to look back at how its geographic footprint has expanded. Its first major discovery happened among Malaysian pig farmers back in 1998. At that time, pigs were actually acting as the intermediate hosts, amplifying and spreading the virus directly to the farmers who handled them. By 1999, it moved over to Singapore through imported sick pigs. But the story didn't stop there. Over the past 2 decades, the geographic spread has widened significantly, with outbreaks occurring almost annually in countries like Bangladesh and India. We can trace this persistent timeline right up to the recent 2026 outbreak, which critically involved 2 nurses in a hospital in West Bengal. This history really proves that Nipah isn't just a one-off anomaly. It's a persistent, evolving, and recurring threat.
The crucial point underlying all of this history is that Nipah is a zoonotic disease. That means it relies entirely on an animal reservoir, in this specific case, the fruit bat, to survive, replicate, and eventually spill over into human populations. Zoonosis is a term you'll hear quite a lot in modern epidemiology, mainly because so many of our most dangerous emerging diseases operate exactly this way. The virus lives its life quietly within the animal. It replicates, gets passed from bat to bat in the roost, and it just waits. It's that precise moment it crosses the species barrier that the global alarm bells start ringing.
There's actually a terrifying biological paradox at play here. In flying foxes, the infection is completely asymptomatic. The bats do not get sick at all. They just act as vessels, carrying the pathogen as they go about their nightly routines. But when that exact same virus enters a human body, the biological reaction is explosive. It triggers severe respiratory distress and encephalitis, which is a highly dangerous and rapid swelling of the brain. It's a stark, fascinating reminder of how a virus perfectly adapted to live harmoniously in one species can wreak absolute physiological havoc the moment it finds itself in a vulnerable new host.
The mystery deepens even further when we look at how this actually presents in a clinic. The initial symptoms essentially masquerade as a simple, everyday flu. You've got a fever, a nagging headache, muscle pain, some vomiting, and a sore throat. Because of this, early and accurate diagnosis is incredibly difficult for frontline doctors. But then, the condition just plummets. Serious symptoms emerge with terrifying speed, including severe difficulty breathing, intense confusion, seizures, and aggressive brain inflammation. In many cases, patients fall into a coma within just 24 to 48 hours. That tiny, rapidly closing window of time is what makes clinical detection and intervention so incredibly challenging.
So how does it actually get to us? Well, the virus navigates from the wild into human populations through 3 primary pathways. First, directly through fruit bats. Eating raw fruits that have been contaminated with bat saliva or urine can directly infect a human. Second, the virus travels through infected animals, particularly pigs, exactly like we saw in those early Malaysian outbreaks. And third, and perhaps most concerningly, through human-to-human transmission. This final pathway is particularly dangerous in crowded hospitals that lack proper safety measures.
Close contact with an infected patient's bodily fluids allows the virus to jump aggressively from the patient to their family caregivers, or to the very healthcare workers trying to save their lives.
Which brings us to the most pressing question of our whole investigation. How do we stop a pathogen that hides completely out of sight? If the virus is naturally circulating high up in the trees with the flying foxes, how on earth do we monitor it before it spills over into our towns, villages, and major cities? Well, the answer is as simple as it is daring. We literally have to go into the dark. We have to go exactly where the bats are.
And that brings us right to the front lines of global health. We meet virus hunters like scientist John Epstein, along with local bat experts Pudu and Gafoor. Now, what's truly fascinating about this part of the story is that Pudu and Gafoor actually used to be bat hunters for the food trade, but they pivoted. They decided to use their incredibly deep ecological knowledge to help international scientists catch these bats safely in nighttime forest flyways. Working together, they string up these large, specialized nets high in the canopy corridors, and they wait silently in the dark to carefully intercept the bats mid-flight.
It's an intense process, but it's amazing to learn what happens after a successful catch. The team carefully restrains the bats, collects vital blood samples, and gathers excretions to test for the virus and rigorously analyze its genetic makeup. But they don't just toss the animals back into the night sky once the science is done. Believe it or not, they actually reward the dehydrated bats with a little drink of mango juice to help them recover from the stress of the procedure. It's this surprisingly gentle, lighthearted moment right in the middle of a high-stakes scientific investigation into a deadly pathogen.
Through this kind of rigorous boots-on-the-ground field work, scientists eventually discovered a massive piece of the puzzle. They found that between the months of December and March, bats actively drink from and contaminate the date palm sap that local humans harvest. People set up collection pots on the trees overnight. In the dark, the bats swoop in, take a generous drink of the sweet, sugary sap, and invariably leave behind saliva and urine. When humans come along to collect that sap the next morning and consume it raw, the virus is seamlessly transmitted. It is quite literally a ticking time bomb of ecological overlap.
This creates an ongoing, terrifying threat for health organizations everywhere. Scientists are currently tracking bat colonies that have set up permanent roosts in dense urban parks, sometimes directly in the middle of sprawling megacities with populations of over 12 million people. If the virus mutates to spread more easily from person to person in an incredibly dense environment like that, the results will be globally catastrophic, especially considering that currently there is no specific cure or vaccine for the Nipah virus. Treatment strictly focuses on intensive care, providing breathing support, and managing that deadly brain swelling. While early hospital care can absolutely save lives, medically speaking, we are still largely defenseless.
But despite those alarming numbers and the current lack of a targeted vaccine, prevention remains our absolute best defense. We can proactively protect ourselves by following some very clear, practical steps to effectively block those transmission pathways. Here is exactly how you can protect yourself. Actively avoid eating partially eaten fruits and immediately discard anything with a visible bat bite mark. Wash all your fruits thoroughly before eating them. Always boil raw date palm sap before drinking it to kill off any pathogens. Keep up good general hygiene. And crucially, in healthcare settings, workers must use full protective equipment and immediately isolate suspected cases to stop human-to-human spread dead in its tracks.
I want to highlight a thought from virus hunter John Epstein that beautifully reframes this entire narrative. He points out that wildlife is critically important to balancing our ecosystems. The bats are not villains maliciously invading our space. In reality, we are continuously encroaching on theirs. As our agricultural footprints expand further into the forests, we find ourselves sharing the exact same food sources and the exact same spaces. Eradicating the bats simply isn't an option. They are way too vital to the ecological balance. Coexistence, achieved through deep understanding and smart, targeted prevention, is our best and only true defense. I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to consider long after this explainer wraps up. The Nipah virus may not be in Pakistan or your local community quite yet, but the global threat is very real. Diseases do not respect borders, and our daily relationship with nature ultimately dictates our public health future. Constant awareness, rigorous prevention, and rapid early action can save thousands upon thousands of lives. Stay informed, stay safe. Thank you so much for diving into this incredible investigation with me today.